Hello and welcome to Pittsburgh Tomorrow. I'm Donald Bonk. I'm passionate about the future. Let's take a journey there. You'll hear from Pittsburgh's most compelling leaders, thinkers, and creators, and through their imaginations and voices, we'll explore the decades to come. Hello, and thank you for joining us for Pittsburgh Tomorrow, Episode 12, or Part 2, of our conversation with Richard Florida, the influential New York Times bestselling author, professor, and urbanist. We begin with a brief quote from Richard Florida from Episode 11, or Part 1, that was later tweeted out by Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto, before we resume the conversation here in Episode 12, or Part 2. We will conclude this particular conversation with Richard next week in Episode 13, or Part 3. So thank you very much for traveling with us for these important and entertaining visits to Pittsburgh tomorrow.
So I think Pittsburgh could be the best, most livable, most sustainable, and I would echo most inclusive, racially and economically inclusive. And Mayor Peduto has put a big, Bill's an old dear friend of mine from my Pittsburgh days. He's put an emphasis on inclusive innovation. I think this idea of a shared prosperity, harking back to union movement, harking back to the steel workers, harkening back to people who struggled, who literally fought pitched battles in the streets of Homestead and along the Monongahela River. I think Pittsburgh should be the model of the best, the most equitable, the most inclusive, the healthiest, the safest, and most resilient small city in the world.
No, and that's extremely helpful, just tying that past history, because the union movement obviously shared wealth in a way, in the progressive era. Changes were set afoot that didn't come to fruition to a few decades later, but shared prosperity was Pittsburgh's story through the 40s, late 40s, 50s, and 60s.
You think about also the Spanish flu, the devastating impact of the Spanish flu on Pittsburgh, the fact that people were annihilated in the factory and steel mill complexes, the fact that there wasn't access to health care, how that stimulated a movement in Pittsburgh to provide much better public health. And then that combined with the great floods and the air pollution, with the air pollution contributing to respiratory distress, this other movement after the war to kind of do the Renaissance, which wasn't so much about changing the economy. It was a little bit. It was about making Pittsburgh a cleaner and safer and better place to live. So if you take the union movement, if you will, and the labor movement, the progressive movement in Pittsburgh to give working people a better livelihood, and you combine that with the environmental movement and the movement for health, Pittsburgh has this stuff, that and innovation in its very DNA. So that's where I think the other thing I think that Pittsburgh has going for it in the wake of this COVID crisis, my view increasingly is that the central business district, the giant central business district like you see in Manhattan, the financial district or Midtown headquarters district, is a relic of the past. It's kind of the last echo of the industrial age. It's kind of what the factory complexes were to Pittsburgh and Detroit. There is no reason that hundreds of thousands and millions of people need to get in cars and trains and buses and subways and commute a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, 90 minutes each way to go to work. Pittsburgh is a city of neighborhoods, right? At its core, it's a city of neighborhoods. And what urbanists are talking about today is that the COVID crisis creates the ability to rebalance metropolitan regions around a set of hubs and spokes. Of course, there'll be a midtown and a financial district. There'll be a downtown Pittsburgh. But you can imagine out near the university, there already is. You can imagine out in some of the northern and southern and western suburbs, developing these spokes and where you develop 15-minute neighborhoods where people can work, live, and play and spend a lot more time with their family.
Yeah.
And I think Pittsburgh is perfectly laid out to do this because it is a city like Toronto, a city of neighborhoods. It isn't just a city built around one center core, although its center core is spectacular. It's a city built around numerous spectacular neighborhoods with little centers of their own. So I think in becoming this kind of new kind of city region, Pittsburgh can build itself around its great history of neighborhoods as a safe, inclusive, and resilient place around 15 and 20-minute neighborhoods spread all across the region.
That's really helpful. So you've kind of, positioned Pittsburgh in a particular way and answered this question about ideal or best city. Segueing this, we've touched on this issue of a moonshot, and the publisher's really been interested in this idea. Is there a big idea, one big idea? You've listed a number of ideas in terms of equity, innovation, the green movement. Is there, if you had one big idea that Pittsburgh might or think about adopting or not, we've had this discussion about moonshots. Some people don't believe in moonshots, but do you think there's one singular idea among these ideas that would be transformative of Pittsburgh's narrative?
Yeah, I do. I think that Pittsburgh should put together every single philanthropic dollar it can, and it has. The Carnegie, Mellon. We can go down the list. Benedum. We can go down the list of the philanthropy and the new wealth that's been created in Pittsburgh. Not just of Pittsburghers in Pittsburgh, but people from Pittsburgh who made wealth outside of Pittsburgh.
Mark Cuban, for example, or David Tepper.
Put together the biggest pot of money: Tepper, Cuban, Hines, Mellon, Benedum, whatever, and create a pot of money to attract 100 best and brightest superstar geniuses in the world, from computer science and artificial intelligence and arts and culture. One of the things the COVID crisis has done is people feel unmoored. For the first time in my life, people are saying, how do I want to live? I want to spend more time with my family. I don't want to go back to the grind. I don't want to get on a plane. I don't want to have to go to the office every day. I'm working from home. I'm spending time with my wife and kids, spending time with my friends. I'm living in my neighborhood. I'm getting healthier. I'm riding my bike. I'm walking. People are saying, maybe I'll take a look. And with the cutbacks happening in universities and the stress in the research system, Pittsburgh said, we want to attract 10. I just put 100. 100, a MacArthur Genius Award, which is not a MacArthur Genius Award that says stay where you are.
Right.
Come to Pittsburgh and be part of this cohort of 100 of this unbelievably smart people from across disciplines. And the other thing I think is that part of that, and should be an undergirding of it, is really to make Pittsburgh, and here I just have to say it's Carnegie Mellon. And Carnegie Mellon is the place that's still closest to my heart. It's still the university. I think, pound for pound, and I've said this publicly, Carnegie Mellon University is the greatest university in the world, bar none. May not be as big as MIT, may not be as big as Stanford, but pound for pound, given what it does, because it has a humility. It doesn't have this grandiosity. It has a humility, and the people there are just incredible. And the size and scale make it so that I don't know everybody in my department in the Robbins School. It's so big. 95,000 students at the University of Toronto. I knew almost every faculty member. I had a joint appointment in computer science and software engineering because I was working with people there. Anyway, make Pittsburgh the greatest center of artificial intelligence and computer-related, software-related urban technology in the world. So one genius for 100 of the best and brightest, but a real focus on artificial intelligence, particularly as it applies to smart cities. I think this area of urban tech, mobility, surveillance, urban automation, delivery, we can go down the list, micro-mobility. This is the biggest sector of high technology since software.
Right.
And Pittsburgh is the laboratory. It has the scale to try it out. It has Carnegie Mellon. So I would say overall focus on these 100 geniuses, but make a real deep dive move now into making Pittsburgh the center of artificial intelligence, computer-related innovation in cities and smart cities and urban technology. Those two things are moonshots that will pay off. Remember, and this is really important for folks listening in, I'm teaching at Carnegie Mellon. I'm seeing this freaking robotic tank rolling around in the back of Hamburg Hall. So I'm like, what? Well, why is there a robotic tank? Like, why? Like, who cares? We're not going to hopefully fight another war. Hopefully no one. And all of a sudden, no one thought of it. No one in a million, maybe they did. Maybe some people in the robotics institute, if I didn't, we're going to have self-driving cars. And self-driving cars becomes one of the industry segments of several that Pittsburgh can really do well in. Construction technology, building technology, all of this stuff, the way we build cities, the way we get around cities, the way we live in cities, smart homes. I remember, this is so funny, when Astro Teller was at Carnegie Mellon, and he came up with this company called Body Media, which was one of the first to put, a sensor on your arm that would, I have a Fitbit on my arm now, first to do this kind of thing. Well, all of that kind of sensor technology in your house, in your airport, temperature checks, health checks, all the way we're going to have to outfit elevators in buildings so that they're healthier and safer. That stuff comes out of about 4 universities in the world, of which Carnegie Mellon is one. So that's the moonshot. The Center for Urban Innovation, Urban Tech, and the 100 best and brightest in the world come to Pittsburgh with their research finance. Boy, it would be something that would position Pittsburgh for success for the next 100 years.
And as you said, the human scale that exists allows people literally to have a cup of coffee in a way in Pittsburgh among those 100 geniuses or other faculty members at CMU that might not exist at a massive university.
Yeah, and one other thing, Donald, that we always talked about, Herb Simon always mentioned, I talked to my colleagues about, when I lived in Pittsburgh, my house or apartment kept getting closer to the university, such that when I left, I lived in Devonshire Road, across the parking lot from the Heinz School, renting a house that the university had acquired. Now, why is that? In New York City or in Toronto or in Los Angeles or in Boston, there are a lot of distractions. You know, that's great. But in Pittsburgh, there are fewer. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but you gravitate to where the energy is. Where's the energy in Pittsburgh? On the Carnegie Mellon campus. So I found myself, I probably would have been living in my office had I stayed another 5 years. But the point of fact is the scale of the city is small. Many people live close by. Most of us come to the office when we lived in Pittsburgh, and they don't. No one ever goes to their office in New York City because it's hard to get to and it's far and, and there's a lot of distractions. Right. But in Pittsburgh, you gravitate to your colleagues and your students and to the on-campus life. I think that's another big advantage. The area surrounding Carnegie Mellon and University of Pittsburgh is almost like an extended campus, a collegial campus. Right. That's a big deal. And I think more people are looking for that now. More people are saying, I don't want to get on a plane. I don't want to do all this other stuff. I want to do really interesting work and be close to my family and friends. And I think Pittsburgh has that to offer.
And with this added access to some of the most brilliant minds in the world that are there, but maybe attracted by this philanthropic moonshot. Yeah, and I think smart people have always loved Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh has smart and innovative in its DNA. I think that Pittsburgh has always respected intelligence. It's not like so much of the rest of America that's so captivated by celebrity culture. But I'll give you a funny story. Mm-hmm. We spend the winter in Miami Beach, and we like the city and want to help the mayor. And you see what's happening with the COVID crisis there. And it ends up my kids, even though I'm Catholic, my kids and my wife's Catholic. My kids in Miami, because I had kids later, in Jewish preschool. In our little Jewish preschool, DJ Khaled's kid, DJ Khaled's a Palestinian. He's in the Jew. It's very secular Jewish preschool. Anyway, so the mayor, trying to help the mayor, getting it together, the COVID spiking. And we say, we'll talk to Khaled. My wife says, I'll talk to Khaled and have him do a PSA for wearing a mask. And there's not, the only person that folks in Miami would listen to is DJ Khaled. Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying? In Pittsburgh, there is a respect. They wouldn't know what to do with a professor like me. If I said wear a mask, they'd say, who's that guy? Mm-hmm. But in Pittsburgh, there is a respect for intelligence. There is at Carnegie Mellon, if you're at Carnegie Mellon, and I don't mean to say this, you have status in the community the way you don't have, even if you're at MIT, you don't have that same status in Boston. You have some. There is a respect for learning, for research, for intelligence in Pittsburgh. So in that way, it's a magnet because people go, oh, I can have support for my research. But people think what I'm doing is actually good. And if I work at UPMC and I'm making health, and I'm a transplant surgeon or working on tissue engineering, or people think I'm actually contributing to the society in a meaningful way. So I think it's both the fact that we have magnets for talent, but there's tremendous respect for that talent in the environment that's very unique in the America of celebrity culture today. And not just celebrity culture, it worships celebrities and rich people. Pittsburgh is it's like, I hate to say it's like going back in time. Mm-hmm. It's not quite like going back in time. It's like being part of the fabric of what America was and a lot of things we lost. And I think intellectuals, researchers really, really like that climate. So it's just a sidebar, but an analogy. Dr. Fauci's recent celebrity as the smart man in this crisis on a national level. I mean, we've been distracted by television reality stars, and now we have a man who for 5 or 6 presidents in a row has been, the voice of the science community, the medical community. And just interesting to see in this moment that on a national level, maybe a Pittsburgh value in terms of, valuing that type of talent and ability to impact the quality of life is maybe a shift in our culture here in 2020.
It's really interesting. When I look at the United States from the vantage point of Toronto, I would say our national politics is in deep, deep trouble. And we are so darn polarized that I don't know. I mean, look, Joe Biden will get elected. It will be way better. The country will pull together. He'll actually put some Republicans in his administration. Things will be, this is like the low point. But when I look at what's great about America, it's the Pittsburghs and the Philadelphias and even Newark, my hometown, and Bentonville, Arkansas, where I'm doing work, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, and, Omaha, Nebraska. It's this up from the bottom public-private partnership anchored by universities like Carnegie Mellon or Penn or Drexel or NYU. I could go down the list. University of Arkansas. There's so many of these examples. Rutgers, Newark, and NJIT in New Jersey that are putting together these redevelopment efforts and now focusing on resiliency and inclusivity. It's this up from the bottom thing. So I think one of the big trends we have to do, changes in the wake of this COVID crisis, is look, don't strengthen the federal government. Look, if Trump had more power, we'd be in hell in the handbasket. The last thing we need to do is give our federal government more power. What we need to do is give the Pittsburghs of the world the power they need to grow, and those values can then people go, well, look, that's a place, and that's a place maybe Pittsburgh will never be the trendiest place for young people. Maybe young people, we'll always go to the big city, New York, LA, San Francisco.
Especially in their 20s and early 30s before they want to have a family.
100%. But then when you have kids, you go, oh, it's hard to live here. The schools aren't very good. I've got to commute. I got to try to find them a public school, or I got to commute them a half an hour to a private school. I don't want to put them around all elite rich kids. I'd rather have them in a good public school or in a neighborhood school. And it's hard life
in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. So Taylor, you go down the list, and Pittsburgh has an environment of affordability, cohesive neighborhoods, wonderful housing stock. And there are a few places like that in the United States, but it's not an infinite list. And I think, go back to the COVID crisis, which you mentioned, when people become unmoored and they go, oh God, I've loved New York, I've loved San Francisco, but I have 2 or 3 kids now. It's really getting less affordable. Do I really want to go to the suburb outside, or can I remote work from Pittsburgh, Nashville, the list, Indianapolis, Hudson River Valley towns outside of New York, a part of somewhere in Colorado that's not as expensive as Aspen. People do that mental calculation on almost everybody's list, Pittsburgh. I mean, that's amazing to me. Now, it might not be that everybody ends up in Pittsburgh, but everybody goes, I know a friend, they liked Pittsburgh. They moved. And it's almost like Nashville had this vibe happening 5-6 years ago. Pittsburgh's now there. People are, and what I would say to Pittsburgh is, watch out for the new urban crisis. Watch out for the crisis of success, because if you had said to people in Austin 20 years ago that Austin would become unaffordable, they would have looked at you like you're from the moon. If you had said Nashville would become unaffordable, people would have said you're just an insane person. But once you get this dynamic gets a hold of you, Denver is in the throes of it now. So the other thing I would say to Pittsburgh is be careful, because everything that you've done right could become a challenge, could become paradoxically a conundrum or a challenge for you, or a part of a new urban crisis of success.
The trap of success. So just sidebar here real quickly before we get to the last question. I interviewed 2 people recently. One is a Wharton grad, has a startup named Click It. His name's Vivek Kumar. He's 35. He has his company in Pittsburgh, but he also has distributed teams in New Delhi and in San Francisco. But what he does is arbitrage Pittsburgh. So he lives in Pittsburgh, but he has a room in Silicon Valley that he flies there, stays in his little room, and then flies back to Pittsburgh when he needs to. So it's not necessarily staying in one place or the other, but Pittsburgh is a home base.
So I think you're exactly right. I think this idea of the multi-locational household is going to become more and more. And, I've heard this a lot about San Francisco, but I've also heard it increasingly about New York. San Francisco and New York are simply too expensive to have a lot of space. And certainly if you have kids, it's really hard to have the space you need to have a home office and have kids. So what you do is get the equivalent of a studio, and a studio is still more expensive than a house in Pittsburgh, but you rent or buy a studio. Now, some people in San Francisco are going to the rural areas outside of San Francisco. Some people in New York are going to the Hudson Valley, but others are saying, the heck with that. I would much prefer Pittsburgh. My good friends at the Kaiser Family Foundation in Tulsa have created this program called Tulsa Remote, which is actually an attempt to create a community of remote workers. When I go there, there are people from New York, from San Francisco, from LA, from Chicago, from Atlanta. I could go down the list of people who said, I'd rather live in Tulsa. Well, the same thing that you're saying about Pittsburgh. I don't think it'll be, I don't even think myself. I think I'll always have to be connected to New York or Washington, D.C. or somewhere. But you can live in one place and connect to the hub centers. And Pittsburgh is one of, look, when people talk about the rise of the rest, they make a mistake if they talk about 300 places.
Mm-hmm.
When we really drill down into the rise of the rest, you're talking about a dozen or 24 places.
Mm-hmm.
And Pittsburgh is on that list. There is a very short list of places that can be the hub-spoke connections that what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh is surely one of them.
So the analogy is the hub and spoke in the Pittsburgh metro area that you talked about in terms of neighborhoods and connecting to the smart centers like Oakland is the same hub and spoke metaphor for the nation, where you're in a also. Yeah.
I forgot my one other moonshot idea. I had another one that I got so excited about, which goes back to our days in Pittsburgh, talking to folks like Tim McNulty, who's still at Carnegie Mellon, and Don Smith.
He's my patron. He's been my patron for a dozen years. Yeah.
Tim. I mean, I talk to Tim all the time, and he speaks very highly of you, by the way, as do I. And Don Smith, who's at the Regional Industrial Corporation, RDC. We talked then about how you could make Pittsburgh more of a hub. And with the Biden administration likely to come on stream, and with major infrastructure spending likely to be part of the ongoing stimulus,
mm-hmm.
high-speed rail,
mm-hmm.
high-speed, especially if taking a plane is fraught with issues related not just to this virus. If we were to undertake a high-speed rail initiative in the United States to connect what John Gottman, the great economic geographer who invented the idea of megalopolis, called the Chi-Pitts mega region,
mm-hmm.
High-speed rail going from Pittsburgh west to Detroit and Chicago,
mm-hmm.
and east to Washington, D.C. and New York, or connecting in through Washington, D.C. and up through the Acela corridor.
Right.
And maybe someday to Toronto. That's
mm-hmm.
more of a pipe dream. But think about an east-west coast connection where you would have high-speed rail that would reduce the rail commute pretty substantially, both to Chicago and to New York or D.C. That's the game changer. If that's the way to make Pittsburgh really the core spoke in a multi-hub spoke system. And so that would be my third moonshot. Talent, genius, grant, bring them to Pittsburgh, make Pittsburgh the urban tech AI capital of the world, mm-hmm. and connect the damn place through high-speed rail, because the Biden administration is going to have to do it.
Right. Create the physical equivalent of the virtual infrastructure that we already have in place.
100%.
Yeah. No, that's really tremendous, and really appreciate that deep thought on that level. Lastly, the question, we look at 2050, 3 decades in the future, next 3 decades. 1990 is as far as away as 2050. So are there any 3 kind of granular, more practical ideas? If you're, in the Urban Redevelopment Authority or the mayor's office or the county executive office in Pittsburgh, are there 3 kind of more Pittsburgh-centric granular things that you think Pittsburgh could take on as projects that would make a tremendous or even an impactful difference?
So 2050
is as far as
that would be like 93. I don't think I'll be alive. My kids would be what? My kids are 3 and 4.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So what are they going to be?
In their mid-30s. They'd be in their mid-30s.
I was thinking, 40 something, close to 40, the mid-30s to 40s. I want them to live in a great world, right? So that's what I want more than anything, my 2 girls to live in a fantastic world. And it's something I'm worried about.
Mm-hmm.
I would say for Pittsburgh, it needs to really double down on social cohesion. It's a hard thing it's not like, create an incubator or mm-hmm. develop an industrial incentive package. But one of the things that distinguishes Pittsburgh from the rest of America, which I like about Toronto and why my girls have dual citizenship, is it's very cohesive, and you can feel it pulling together in a crisis. We set up our front porch here, mm-hmm. and people walk by and have a glass of wine and talk in the evening. That's like a Pittsburgh thing. I think focusing really hard on making sure that Pittsburgh isn't pulled apart, and respect for difference. The fact that Pittsburgh is blue and red is important, but in Pittsburgh, that isn't a pitched battle like it is in the country. People, even in their same family, have a Trump supporter and a Biden supporter.
Thank you for listening to Part 2 of this interview. Part 1 can be heard on pittsburghtomorrow.com, and we encourage you to tune in next week to hear the conclusion of our conversation with Richard Florida. If you like what you heard today, please click the subscribe button located just above the podcast player at pittsburghtomorrow.com. We also encourage you to share episodes on social media. And finally, we encourage you to go to the Apple Podcasts page for Pittsburgh Tomorrow and leave a review. Tell us what you think, your suggestions, and how we can improve.